Oh, you're so funny. Sally put the flowers in her basket as she walked down the street. I just demonstrated 4 different types of theater. Today in my speech, I will be talking to you about those 4 types of theater, which are comedy, tragedy, mime, and narration. First, let's start off with comedy. Well, the question is, what is comedy? Well, according to BiteSize.com, comedy is simply a lighthearted drama that's made for laughs. We've seen comedies all the way from Tyler Perry's Medea all the way to Jim Carrey starring in The Mask. Now, you might ask, how does one person get into the comedy aspects of theater? Well, some things that people like to do when they want to get into comedy is they go to a comedy class. A comedy class is just basically a class where they teach you basically the backgrounds about comedy. They also teach you about jokes and how to be more relatable to your audience. Being relatable to your audience is a very important key when it comes to comedy, simply because it makes your audience feel like they're right in the scene with you. And our next topic we're going to talk about today is tragedies. Tragedies are basically movies where the main character either meets ruin or they suffer. An example of a tragedy would be Macbeth. In the movie Macbeth, Macbeth kills the king that looks at him like a son simply because Macbeth wants his wealth. Throughout the movie, Macbeth starts to slowly crumble down to his guilt, basically because he starts to remember that all the friends and everyone he's hurt and killed simply because he lied. By the end of the story, Macbeth ends up dying in war by decapitation. The moral of that story is that power can and most likely will corrupt you. Another example of a tragedy would be Romeo and Juliet. In the movie Romeo and Juliet, Romeo falls heads over heels for Juliet, only to find out they can never wed simply because Romeo and Juliet's family have been feuding for years. Romeo was a Montague and Juliet was a Capulet. Romeo ends up killing himself by poison because he hears that Juliet has died and he doesn't want to be on the earth anymore if he's not going to be there with the love of his life. Only he didn't know was that Juliet was simply in a very deep coma. When Juliet wakes up and hears that Romeo has died, she takes the last of the poison that Romeo drank, which kills her instantly. The moral of this story is that love can kill you. Our next topic that we're going to be talking about today is mime. Mime is basically a theater and an acting point where there's no talking, only body movement. An example of mime would be making a box or throwing a rope and pulling it back. Now, when you hear mime, the first thing that might pop in your head is somebody that has on white paint over their face and all black clothing and is all up in your personal space. Well, really, mime is one of the top keys and one of the top theaters that uses 3 out of the 4 topics that we are talking about today. Our last and final topic that we're going to talk about today is narration. An example of narration would be like the story I gave you earlier. Sally put the flowers in her basket as she walked down the street. Narration is just basically storytelling. You're giving details of a story as they're happening. Another example of narration would be a stage exit. For example, Ashley throws the bowl on the floor and storms off stage. Today we were able to talk about 4 different types of theater. We talked about comedy, tragedy, mime, and narration. I gave you a few examples on mime and narration, and we also talked about what a comedy class is and what it means to our audience when you make it relatable for comedy. We also talked about a few tragedy plays. In conclusion, these 4 theaters have been available for years and they excel to even higher extent. I hope I was able to give you the proper information you need in order for you to know more about the theater background. Thank you.